Hey guys, Kit here. Thank you so much for tuning into the second part of my 3-part mini-series on panic and anxiety disorder. Now, the first part, I'll leave the link in the description below. If you haven't watched it, go ahead and check it out. That one is going to talk about what the difference is between anxiety and panic disorder. Today's topic is going to be about my story and how I developed anxiety and panic disorder. If I was to be 100% honest, this video is probably going to be the hardest out of the 3, just because the topic is going to touch on some really painful parts of my life. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started on part 2 of this anxiety and panic series. I didn't actually start developing panic and anxiety symptoms until January of 2015. But looking back on it, I could definitely trace the start of it to be somewhere in September 2014. 2014 was a pretty difficult year for me. I had just quit my job. I started my own media business, and so I was super broke trying to start my own business. And I've never done anything so intense like that before. Literally, the way I started my business was I just hopped on a boat, got to an island, and burned the boat. I believe I officially started the business in about July of 2014, somewhere in the summertime, between June and August. I'm pretty sure it was around July. And about 2 months after I started my business in September, I decided to go visit my dad, who I hadn't seen in a couple years. My dad was living in Idaho at the time. I was in California. Over the years, I just never made a really good effort to go visit him. I always made excuses like I didn't have enough money, I was busy with work, blah, blah, blah. And at that time, it wasn't that I didn't want to see him. I loved my dad. I'm daddy's little girl, so I loved my dad and I wanted to see him, but I went through what a lot of people go through when they have jobs or when life gets in the way. You find reasons not to do something you want to do because of life. So I had just started my business. I was just getting used to the kind of freedom that I never experienced before, not having to clock into a job. I basically got to choose my own schedule, and I was super excited because I was like, oh, finally, if I want to go visit my dad, I can make time to go visit my dad without worrying about getting fired for it. So I picked a date on Memorial Day weekend to finally go visit my dad, and I packed up my bags and I went, and we had a fantastic time. I remember the first time he opened the door of his house and he saw me standing on his porch. I mean, just like that. Oh my god, he was so excited to see me, and I was so excited to see him. We hugged each other so tight, and that was a moment I won't forget. So I got there on a Friday. I think I was only supposed to be there on a Monday, but I was having so much fun that I extended my stay an extra day. And we went fishing. We went to the Eastern Idaho State Fair because it was in town. I mean, it was great. I had so much fun spending time with my dad. And I remember sitting there just hanging out with him and talking about life and catching up. And I mean, obviously I called him all the time, but it was just so different to be able to sit there next to him and actually talk to him in person. And so I remember the last time I saw him, he was headed out to work. Matt and I were gonna leave right after him. He had just gotten up, he was getting ready to go to work, and we hadn't yet packed. We were in the middle of getting all our stuff together, so he left to go to work before we even left. And I remember hugging him and saying, we'll be back. I could still remember how he smelled because he had this cologne that he was wearing, and so Matt and I spent 14 hours driving back to California after we said our goodbyes to my dad. And then I remember as I was driving up to my apartment complex, I got a call from my dad, and he was like, hey, I figured this was around the time you guys were gonna get home. I just wanted to call, make sure you guys got back okay. And I was like, yeah, we did. And I told him, you know, I love you so much. I can't wait to see you next spring. I had so much fun. I love you so much. And he told me he loved me. He told me he was proud of me. And he was so grateful that Matt and I took the time to come up and visit him. So Matt and I came back, I think on the 2nd or 3rd of September. Because we were there for Labor Day weekend. We were there Friday through, I think, Tuesday. Maybe it was Wednesday, I don't remember. But anyways, we came back on the 2nd or 3rd of September. A week and a half after that, on September 12th, which was a Friday, I remember that I wanted to call my dad. Like, I just had this urge that I wanted to call him. I was going to, but then I got really busy throughout the day and I forgot to do it. And I remember that night I was sitting down at the computer working on something for the business. I was by myself, Matt was upstairs sleeping, my roommate was upstairs sleeping, so it was just me. It was like, I don't know, past midnight. And back then I used to have a picture of my mom and my dad sitting next to me on my desk on the left-hand side. And I remember my eyes just kind of glanced at the picture. And my eyes met my dad's eyes in the picture, and there was like something about it I felt really weird. Like I felt an intense emotional sadness that I didn't understand where it was coming from. I don't know, it was just something about that moment. Looking at my dad's picture, I just felt immensely sad. And I couldn't understand why, and immediately my body just felt heavy. And I thought, all right, well, maybe I'm just tired, so I stopped working. So I went to bed, and then I woke up, and I had a meeting that day. So I went to my meeting, and in the middle of my meeting, my aunt, which is my dad's sister in Idaho, texted me and told me that my dad had gone up to the cabin. He went on a boat, and they found his boat overturned on the lake, but my dad was nowhere to be found. And she didn't sugarcoat it. She said at this point they believe my dad had been missing for 24 hours and that it didn't look good. As soon as I got the call, probably 2 or 3 hours later, Matt and I had packed our bags and we were on the road again, headed straight back to Idaho. And sure enough, the boat had been overturned. The search and rescue team were there, but they weren't calling it a search and rescue. At this point, they were calling it a search and recover. We had so many people take time off to help us scour the lake in their boats with the search and rescue team, trying to basically locate him. And it took us 7 days, but finally we recovered my dad's body, and then we had a funeral. So in 2014, I lost one of my best friends, which was really hard because it was the first time in my life that I had ever lost anybody so close to me. Up until that point, death was like a concept, right? Like it was something that happened to everybody else, but it didn't happen to me. Having started a new business and being just going through the growing pains of a startup entrepreneur, and then a couple months later losing my dad, I was at that point where I was just the stress bucket. So my mom, who lives in Japan, called me and said, hey, you know, with everything that's happening, why don't you come home to Japan, visit with your family here, take some time off, just come and relax. Matt and I thought that was a fantastic idea, so we took my mom up on the offer and we flew to Japan in December. So Matt and I got to Japan. We got to see my family, my mom, my aunt, my uncles, my Ji-chan, which is my grandpa, and my Ba-chan, which is my grandma and my cousin. Despite everything that happened, I was happy. I was home. I was with people that I loved and cared about, and I was having a great time. My grandma at the time was going through some dementia. She was slowly losing her mind, and she forgot everybody else, but she remembered me, which to this day, I'm just like, because she was somebody I was really, really close to. When I was growing up, she practically raised me when my mom and my dad were at work, so I was really, really close to my grandma. So we were supposed to be in Japan for a month, and about a week or two before we left, my ba-chan, my grandma, passed away. Her passing was really sudden. It was one of those, I mean, it wasn't surprising considering, you know, her dementia and how old she was, but it was definitely something nobody expected. I mean, I guess nobody really expects when those things happen, but it was one of those, like, it was a shocker. It wasn't like she was ill for a long time and like she was in the hospital. No, she was at home. I had just taken her fishing just like a day before. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, I hear my mom screaming, because everybody in Japan pretty much lives with each other. My grandparents lived on the bottom floor, my mom and my aunt and me and Matt were up on the top floor. And I heard my mom coming down the corridor screaming at the top of her lungs that ba-chan, my grandma, had passed away. It was like 7 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So I rushed downstairs, and sure enough, she was in that weird transition where she was still alive, but she was slowly losing consciousness. And my grandpa, like, was holding her in his lap. And I remember just the scene of chaos. My mom was running to her, trying to give her CPR. My grandpa was holding her head, not quite sure what to do. My aunt was in the background, just running back and forth because she didn't know what to do. And finally, like, and I just remember just watching my ba-chan go from being alive to being dead. And it was the first time I had ever seen somebody who was alive die right in front of my eyes. Like, my dad, by the time we recovered his body, he had already passed on 7 days prior, and I never actually got to see his body. They didn't want me to see it because he had been in water for 7 days, and they wanted me to remember my dad how he was, so I never actually got to see my dad's body. So my ba-chan was the first person I had ever seen dead, and I didn't realize how crazy that feeling is to see somebody go from being alive 1 minute and then not alive the next minute. Just, it was the most bizarre thing I had ever experienced in my life. So within 4 months after my dad had passed away, I lost my ba-chan. 2 people that I was really close to, 2 people that I loved immensely. And there was a little bit of me feeling a little guilty because I was like, why are these people dying after I visit them? There was a while after my ba-chan and my dad that I didn't want to visit anyone that I didn't see for a long time because I was afraid I was gonna kill them. Like, literally, I was so, like, I had such high anxiety about this. Because my dad dies after I go to see him, after not having to see him after 2 years, and then my ba-chan passes away after I hadn't seen her after a couple years. Like, I felt like the Grim Reaper for a really, really long time. So after my ba-chan passed away, 3 days later, and I mentioned this in the vlog yesterday, I was sitting with my uncle. We had just gotten done doing Japanese funeral stuff, and with Japanese funerals, it's intense. It's like a 7-day process. I should make a video about it next time, but basically, let's just say it's an intense process. You have the body in the house for like 3 days before it gets cremated. Like, it's a whole process. The Buddhist monk comes, blesses the body, does a whole bunch of rituals. It's not like, it wasn't like my dad where we just took his body, threw it in a coffin, and put him in the ground. No, this was an entire process. It was a whole Buddhist ritual, and it was intense. It was one of those moments where from the moment you woke up to the moment you went to bed, you were inundated with a reminder of what happened. 3 days after my ba-chan passed away, we had just gotten done doing another Buddhist ritual that took hours, where we just sat there and listened to a Buddhist monk chant. Ba-chan's body had just been cremated, and I was sitting there, and it was like one of the first times in 3 days that I was able to just sit and relax and watch TV. So I was sitting there watching TV with my uncle, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, my body just went cold. I mean, freezing. I've never felt that intensely cold in my entire life. And immediately, the moment I felt cold, I felt like my stomach had dropped, and I felt as if my body and soul were like trying to come apart from each other, like my soul was trying to pull away from my body. And I remember at that moment feeling like I was about to die, and I was 100% convinced that I wasn't gonna live through the night. It was just intense, an intense fear that I was about to die. My heart was pounding really fast, my chest hurt. My uncle checked my blood pressure, it had shot up, my pulse had shot up. It was intense. I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was dying. So my uncle called my mom, who rushed me to the hospital. And by the time I got to the hospital, my blood pressure had gone down, my pulse had gone down, and I was starting to get some color back into my face. The doctors did tests on me just to make sure that it wasn't anything serious. They did an echocardiogram, they did an EKG, and they did an x-ray. Nothing came up. My heart was perfectly fine. That's when they first told us that it might have been a panic attack, considering everything that had happened in the last 6 months. Starting a business, losing my dad, losing my bachan. There's just something in my brain that just broke. Now, I mentioned this yesterday, but panic attacks feel a lot like heart attacks, and I was super convinced that the doctors were wrong. No matter what test they did, I was 100% convinced that I was dying of some kind of heart-related problem, or that it was either a heart problem at one time, or I was having a stroke, or I was having an aneurysm. Like, I started going online and checking to see what all the symptoms were and how to tell the difference between a panic attack and a heart attack. And then I'd go online and some articles would make me feel calm because they were like, oh yeah, this is a panic attack. And then next articles I would read were like, no, this is definitely something wrong with your heart. You should definitely get it checked out. Big mistake, never do that. Never, if you're that worried, just go to the hospital. Let them tell you what the problem is. Don't ever go online to figure out what your symptoms are, especially when you're in anxiety and hypersensitive mode, because it will like trigger a snowball effect of anxiety. So the first 3 to 4 months after my initial panic attack, I had panic attacks like 5 to 6 times a day. I was checking my blood pressure 10 times a day because I was paranoid that my blood pressure meant everything to me. I thought that if my blood pressure was too high, I had to go to the doctor straight away because there was something wrong with my heart, or I was about to have a stroke, and it was a mess. I was turning into a major hypochondriac, and I was anxious about everything. I was terrified of everything. I was literally afraid if somebody left the room for even like a minute, that they would come back to find me on the floor dead. Like anytime Matt would just go to the bathroom, I would have a panic attack. I couldn't be, I was afraid to be left alone. I was a mess. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't leave my bed. I was pretty much just a hyperventilating mess. I ended up going to the emergency room like 10 or 15 times. I went to my regular doctor to get myself checked again on the echo, the EKG, stress tests on my heart, MRI, stool samples, anytime I had a stomach ache, because now I was thinking I was having stomach cancer. Any kind of physical pain, I was feeling it, whether it was my head, my heart, my stomach. I don't want to go into too much detail about what happened after that 3 to 4 months, because that was around the time my recovery process started to happen, and I want to cover that in tomorrow's video. Today I just wanted to talk about how it happened. Thank you guys for tuning into this portion, the second part of my mini-series talking about how I developed my panic disorder. Please leave a comment below with any thoughts you have on this video or the series so far. If there's anything you ever want me to elaborate in the future when it comes to, maybe something you have questions on about panic or anxiety or just life in general, feel free to comment down below. I'll definitely read them. I might even do a video about it, so let me know. But otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow in my next video. Love you guys so much. Thank you so much for tuning in.